Did you ever listen or read old folklore when you were a child? Those tales of warning to children on how to behave and the dangers that hide in the darkness? Trolls, gnomes, witches, ghosts and other horrors. Well, Bramble is the horror of those tales, but in game form. Bramble is the second game from Dimfrost Studio, the first one being A Writer and His Daughter, a VR game that came out in 2017. A Norwegian studio, they use their country's heritage and folklore as inspiration for Bramble. And as a person from one of the Nordic countries, I gotta say this is probably the most Nordic game I have ever played. So is Bramble worth playing? The game is in English and is nicely voice acted, with an absolute beautiful musical score to boot. You play Olle, an 8-year-old boy. His mother reads him and his 11-year-old sister Lillemor these tales of warning before they go to sleep. But one night, Lillemor decides to go outside after bedtime. As Olle, you follow her, and the pair ends up in a wild adventure, facing up against a variety of monsters and creatures from these old tales. Some are friendly and some are decidedly not. Olle travels through this world filled with magic and horror as you're introduced to different stories and the creatures from them. And let me just put a warning right here. This game is dark. Much darker than I expected, as it really uses some of the most horrific parts of these old tales. It is a game I found at times really upsetting. At the start of the game you will encounter this warning screen, and I advise you to read it before you decide to buy or play the game. These things are not just referenced in the game, they are shown, and it's important to be ready for that. Along with the warning, there is also ample nudity, as these creatures are depicted in the game just as they are in the old tales, so expect some really unclothed, very human-like figures. But I found each time it was done in a very good way, and I never felt like they were overly gratuitous. Now, a full playthrough runs about 4 to 5 hours, and my total ended up being just under 8 hours, because when I first played it I did encounter a game-breaking bug that has now been fixed. So I ended up playing through the game 1.5 times, but overall this game is short. You can finish it in 1 to 2 evenings easily, and it delivers a dark but satisfying experience. Throughout the game you're required to navigate a variety of areas through platforming and minor puzzle solving, along with fighting several bosses along the way. Olle does not have any health, and any damage to him causes him to die. And at least for me, poor Olle died a lot, and in pretty much every possible way. This happens especially during boss fights, where you're required to dodge, hide and throw your glowing magical rock at targets to get through the fight. The bosses do a good job at telegraphing their moves, and while some of the fights have stages, each stage has their own checkpoint, so if you fail it won't throw you back to the very start of the fight. But outside of that, no mistakes are allowed. One wrong move and you are starting straight back from that checkpoint, so the game requires some observing and learning the movement of the bosses. Still, I found the fights to be fair and at times quite challenging. The bosses usually have either long wind-ups to their attacks or in one case simply say the name of the attack, so you should be able to react timely to them. The environment, lighting and level design tells a good visual story, while the music did a great job setting the mood. And when the singing started, after a rather intense scene, it was perfect to match my feelings and emphasize the horror I had just experienced. Now, I did come across some issues when playing the game. When I first played it, I ran across the game-breaking bug that has now been fixed. Outside of that, my main issue are the platforming and camera angle. You see, the game utilizes fixed camera that most of the time is amazing, as it adds to the tension, but it at times can also add to frustration, as I accidentally run Olle off bridges, platforms, or have him jump to his death, because the camera angle is in such a way that the player has limited depth perception. But thankfully there were not too many instances of that, So, is the game worth playing? For me, it definitely was. But I wish I had taken a bit more heed to the warning and prepared myself for some aspects of the game that I found quite distressing. But that is of course going to be really based on the person playing the game. I found the game really enjoyable, I adored the story, and the final fight with the music just fulfilled an old dream of mine, where I actually managed to fight the boss through the theme of In Halls of the Mountain King, which is just so cool. But what about you? Do you think Bramble is worth playing? Have you played the game, and what are your thoughts on it? Let's talk about it in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure to like the video and do all the good YouTube stuff, as it pleases the algorithmic overlords. But whatever you do, I hope you have a lovely day.